Happy Wednesday, everybody! So I'm going to be sharing an opinion on the internet because that's a good place for opinions, because that always goes well. Spoiler alert, my opinion at the end of this video is going to be that we shouldn't really be using the phrase love the sinner, hate the sin. I don't think it works well. But before I get to my opinion, allow me to share what I learned in my research. This phrase originally comes to us from the illustrious Saint Augustine. Once upon a time, Saint Augustine was a bishop and he had a diocese, and within his diocese there was a religious community of sisters who were having some struggles with insubordination and such. So he wrote them a letter. This is a long time ago. This was in the 400s AD. Now, this is a fascinating letter. I read through the whole thing. I took notes on it. You can find a link to my notes in the description below, and within that link, there will be a link to the letter itself. St. Augustine starts his letter by saying that he's not visiting the community for two main reasons. First, he doesn't want to be scandalized by what he sees there. He likes thinking of the holiness of this community and doesn't want to mar that. And secondly, since the troubles that they're having have to do with insubordination, well, how helpful will it be for him as an authority figure to come to the house? I mean, generally speaking, insubordination doesn't really jive well with authority figures. Then after that, he goes on to say that he's praying for them. He talks about how he's so very edified by the example of these sisters who have given up their lives to follow Christ, to love Christ. And he loves those examples. Then he exhorts the sisters to recall the ideals that they're striving for and to examine themselves and renew their desire to become the saints that God wants them to be. Only after all of that context is established does he begin to address the issues themselves. The letter becomes very sobering because the issues that the sisters were dealing with are very sobering for, millennials in the 21st century. For example, he talks about how if a sister needs to take a bath more than once a month because that'll help her get healthier from this sickness that she's dealing with, then that's okay. If Sister X over here says that she needs to have more regular baths because she's sick, well, don't assume the worst, assume that she does actually need it, okay? And don't be jealous. Bathing once a month, that's a great idea. Oh, wow. He also talks about food portions and how, say, Sister X is sick and needs to have more food than general. Well, don't judge her for that either. Don't be jealous. Don't be petty about all these things. And ultimately, at the end of the day, if there's reason for doubt, then those things should be addressed by Mother Superior. Why? Because she's Mother Superior. She's the one that's entrusted with the care of these sisters. But wait, there's more issues. St. Augustine also talks about the virtue of purity, which involves more than just keeping your pants on at the appropriate times. He talks about those occasions when sisters go out in public, because sometimes that happens. And he says, if you happen to notice an attractive guy in town, well, okay, you notice that, because that's what we do as human beings. We have eyeballs. But after that initial glance, after that initial noticing, remember to guard your senses. Remember that it's important to manage our attractions. We're human beings. We're attracted to other human beings. And if I'm in a state of life where it's not appropriate for me to be attracted to this person over here, well then, maybe I should guard my senses a little bit. All falling within the realm of prudence and all that. Alright, there's a whole bunch more nuance that can go into that conversation, but in general, allow me to ignore that today and just assume the fact that we need to guard our senses and guard our heart in regards to other people in the world. Thanks, I owe you. But this is interesting because when it comes to the issue of purity, St. Augustine does more than say, don't be jealous, don't be petty, and Mother Superior will take care of it. He says, call your sisters out. He says, if your sister doesn't listen to you, well then, you're gonna need to get other sisters involved. He says, observe more, learn more, and ultimately, you very well might need to bring this up to Mother Superior. He also says be discreet. We don't need to, be blabbing about others' problems, especially with purity. That's no fun. And then he goes so far to say that even when Mother Superior comes in, if this sister is still being stubborn and doesn't even admit that she has faults here, that she needs to be corrected, kick her out. At this point, she shouldn't be a part of the religious community anymore. She needs to leave. And he says to do this with a love for persons and a hatred for sin. And ultimately, this is the origin of the adage, love the sinner, hate the sin. St. Augustine says, yada yada yada, do this with a love for persons and a hatred for sin. This phrase is also sometimes attributed to Mahatma Gandhi. In his autobiography in 1929, Mahatma Gandhi starts a sentence with, hate the sin, not the sinner, is a precept which, na. But what's really interesting is that it becomes clear very quickly that he doesn't like this phrase. Gandhi doesn't. He says it's a great idea in theory, but put into practice, it's impossible. People aren't doing this. We need to make sure that we have a great love for people. We need to make sure that we are honoring the dignity of the human persons around us. And that ultimately is the reason that a lot of people don't like this phrase nowadays, because it's very easy to come across as pretentious when saying love the sinner, hate the sin. On the other hand, there's this great quote from C.S. Lewis that, if you'll allow me, I want to read, directly from the source. So this is from a book called Mere Christianity, and he starts by saying, I remember Christian teachers telling me long ago that I must hate a bad man's actions, but not hate the bad man. Or, as they would say, hate the sin, but not the sinner. I used to think this a silly, straw-splitting distinction. How could you hate what a man did and not hate the man? But years later, it occurred to me that there was one man to whom I had been doing this all my life. Namely, myself. However much I might dislike my own cowardice or conceit or greed, I went on loving myself. There had never been the slightest difficulty about it. In fact, the very reason why I hated the things was that I loved the man. Just because I loved myself, I was sorry to find that I was the sort of man who did those things. C.S. Lewis talks about it more in another section, and he compares it to something that Jesus said, namely, love your neighbor as yourself. How do we love ourselves? Well, we love the sinner and we hate our own sins. And with our neighbors, we also need to be able to make those distinctions. I still personally am not a big fan of the phrase in most circumstances, but I find C.S. Lewis's perspective very refreshing, and so I wanted to share it with you. So, after all that, spoil this down a little bit. With all this debate around the phrase love the sinner, hate the sin, I think that there's two moral obligations that all of us have that we should recall for a moment here. First, there are times when we need to call each other out on things. And that's really hard and requires a great deal of prudence and delicacy. But at the end of the day, sometimes I need to tell my neighbor we should or should not be doing what you're doing right now. And also many times my neighbor needs to call me out and say, Peter, you shouldn't be doing that. And the second thing, just simply love each other. We need to love each other. And while it's very difficult to maintain the balance of loving each other and also expressing disagreement about moral obligations, we need to. I mean, otherwise, what do we do about this phrase? I mean, can somebody really come up to me and say, you shouldn't be using that phrase because you shouldn't be telling other people what to do in their lives? Wait, you just told me not to do something. What? And yet also, if I am not able to step out of my perspective and listen to another person's perspective when I see them doing something that I think is wrong, how can I possibly really make any progress with that person? Maybe at the end of the day, that person's right and I'm wrong. It's easy to be self-righteous. It's hard to love. It's easy to be indifferent and closed off. It's hard to love. So I think that when we're talking about the phrase, love the sinner, hate the sin, we're talking about a concept which is very difficult to do and comes across wrong a lot of times. And especially with where our culture is right now, in most circumstances, using the phrase probably it's not going to go over right. But still, love people, hate sin. That's something that we're all called to. So that's how I would express it. Love people, hate sin. It has a little bit less wordplay, perhaps, a little less poetic beauty to it, but it also is kind of punchy and direct and to the point. And I like that. Love people, hate sin. Alright, I'm getting off my soapbox, but thank you so much for listening. And also, now that I've shared my opinion, be sure to share your opinion with me because I have 2 ears and 1 mouth. Take care, everyone. I love you. God bless and ciao. So I was going to leave a quote here because somebody said something to the effect of, I'm really good at loving God, it's just people that I have a hard time with. But I can't figure out who said that. Do you know who said that? Someone find out who said that for me. That'd be great. Ciao.